Chapter 1, starting with 3 max-level Unforgivable Curses. Pale morning light fought its way through a narrow basement window and spilled across the cramped room. Dylan Hawkwood stared at the envelope on the table as if it were someone else's. He had pushed the window open out of habit, hoping fresh air would chase away the night's stuffiness. Instead, an owl came barreling in with a whoosh, flapping clumsily and nearly toppling the candlestick before landing at a crooked angle on the old wooden table. A letter was tied to its leg, the very envelope now sitting in front of Dylan. At first, he hardly cared. He was about to shoo the bird back out when his eyes caught the emblem on the paper. A shield with a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake circling the letter H. Above and below, ribbons read Hogwarts and Draco Dormiens Nunquam Titilandus. Dylan's expression froze as if struck by lightning. Hogwarts? Memories swelled up like a dam breaking. He remembered Hermione and the other names from that world. He couldn't believe it. I'm actually in Harry Potter's world? Dylan had always assumed he'd transmigrated into historical England. He never got a golden finger or any early advantage. His parents were obscure, low-level employees in ordinary companies. The family had been poor for as long as he could remember. Over the last decade, he'd given up on fairy tale solutions. His plan was simple: use a little foresight about technology to invest wisely, hoard enough stocks to live comfortably, and avoid trouble. That was his ultimate goal. But this envelope shattered it. This world was far stranger and far more dangerous than he'd imagined. If he couldn't learn magic, all his carefully amassed wealth could be wiped out by a single spell. Wizards could read minds with legilimency, force people with the Imperious Curse, or end lives instantly with Avada Kedavra. If he met someone vicious, one flash of a killing curse, and that would be it. A cold, practical fear made Dylan straighten up. He picked the envelope from the table. The owl flew back out the window. At least, if this was an acceptance letter, he'd have a chance to learn magic. At the very least, he needed charms for escape and self-defense before he tried to buy any stocks. He decided he would focus on learning protective magic first, then slip back into the Muggle world when he was ready and live peacefully. It was a plan he clung to as he tore open the envelope with trembling fingers and drew out the parchment inside. Mr. Dylan Hawkwood Basement, 44 Anshang Road, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Principal, Albus Dumbledore, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, Order of Merlin, First Class. Dear Mr. Hawkwood, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on the 1st September. We await your owl by 31st of July. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. He had just finished reading when a strange interface blinked into existence before him. Dylan whispered, startled. Could this be the long-delayed golden finger he'd always half hoped for? The system window was divided into 4 icons: a wizard's hat, a magic scroll, a wand, and a book. He clicked the hat. It opened his personal info. Name, Dylan Hawkwood. None. Items, new student gift pack. That was it. No spells known, nothing in his repertoire. He tapped the scroll, quests and achievements. The quest log was empty, but the achievements section had one lighted entry. Achievement, first encounter. You have been blessed by magic. Experience this world of wizards and muggles. Requirement to unlock, first contact with a magical event. Reward, Hogwarts new student gift pack. He clicked the wand icon. It showed a tool for refining charms. Name, Dylan Hawkwood. None. The book icon would not open. It was locked and offered no hint. Dylan couldn't suppress a grin. It really was a system. He turned his attention to the gift pack in his items list and opened it. A message appeared. New student gift pack. Upon opening, you will receive 1 magical creature and 3 max-level charms. Dylan nearly choked. 3 max-level charms? He watched as 4 golden lights shot upward from the gift pack, like stars rising to the top of the interface. 3 of them twisted and thinned, then disintegrated into black mist that swirled like vortices. Information flooded into his mind. Images, sensations, sounds, countless faces, humans and creatures alike, and himself standing among them with a wand in hand. The first strike, screams. People in the front row collapsed, writhing and howling in pain. The second strike, a green flash. Those hit in the middle went limp and crumpled, their voices silenced. The third strike, blank, hollow-eyed figures like puppets. Voices whispered in his ears, chants overlaying each other until they were burned into his memory. Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level charm, Cruciatus Curse. Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level charm, Avada Kedavra, Killing Curse. Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level charm, Imperious Curse. Dylan felt the words settle into his bones. The incantations looped in his head with the movements, so vivid he hardly seemed to need a wand to cast them. He staggered back from the interface as his vision swam. He closed his eyes for a moment, heart pounding. When he opened them again, the 3 unforgivable curses were listed in his charms bar. He laughed unsteadily, then a cold realization hit him. Seriously, system? What are you trying to do? Get me arrested on my first day and rot in Azkaban, he muttered, half angry, half terrified. Chapter 2. Fantastic Creatures, Dark Shadows. In the wizarding world, there are 3 spells everyone knows as the most evil, insidious, and cruel, the Unforgivable Curses. Crucio, Avada Kedavra, and Imperio are unlike ordinary spells. They have no known counter-curse, and their casting requires intense negative emotions and magical power far beyond an ordinary witch or wizard. Like most dark arts, once a person uses them, the darkness seeps into their mind and can change who they are. Because of this, the laws of the wizarding world are clear. Anyone caught using one of these spells faces life in Azkaban. Dylan stared at the system panel in disbelief. He had expected random maxed-out spells, but not 3 of them, and all unforgivable. He felt a cold helplessness. Calm down, Dylan, he muttered, patting his cheek. Spells are tools. Even unforgivable curses are tools. Still, he shivered at the thought. He had at least gained power to defend himself, he told himself. If offense is the best defense, then maybe this wasn't all bad. That thought steadied him enough to refocus on the panel. Besides the 3 maxed-out spells, there was 1 free magical creature he could claim. Please, anything cute, he said half-jokingly. Not a phoenix or a Keelan, and please, no Gargamel-looking beasts. Whether Lord Voldemort or Luck answered, a star on the interface burst open with a roar. The air warped, and a small creature sprang out. It looked a bit like a black cat, more like a lynx, with deep midnight fur so dark it showed no markings. Small as a kitten, it radiated an odd coldness rather than cuteness. Its black eyes stared at Dylan with a disquieting intensity. Moo, it made, its paws hidden in its fur as it watched him. Message, you have obtained a magical pet, Umber Shadow. Your pet space has been activated. Umber Shadow? Dylan read the description on the system and sighed in relief. At least not an evil monster. But the note said he would need a license to keep it, otherwise the creature would be illegal to own. The system also granted him a pet space, so he could tuck the animal away when he wasn't keeping it with him. Moo? The little Umber Shadow seemed to try to tell him something. Dylan found he could faintly sense what it meant. You want me to hold you? He guessed. Moo. It raised its head in what looked like pride. A tsundere, then. And why did its meow sound like moo? Dylan reached out and cradled it. Since you're my pet, I should give you a name. The Umber Shadow curled its legs and glanced up at him with no objection. You're all black, Dylan said, smiling. How about Coalball? Moo. The creature bared a tiny tooth and then, to Dylan's surprise, its eyes flashed with satisfaction. He rubbed it. If you like it, that's enough. Your master has a few things to do, so you'll stay in the space for now. Moo? The creature asked, and Dylan placed Coalball into the pet space. The device felt like a perfectly comfortable pocket world, not unpleasant for the animal at all. Dylan wondered if the pet space could be upgraded someday into a full environment. He also realized he would have to visit Diagon Alley to get a breeding license for Coalball. This was his first pet. He couldn't keep it hidden away all the time. Sigh, he muttered. School hasn't even started and I've already done illegal things. He checked the Hogwarts letter again, making sure he understood the admission and the list of required items. Then he folded the parchments back into their envelope and went upstairs. Mom, I have something to tell you, he called. After washing up, Dylan and his parents sat down at the kitchen table. He placed the letter and its list between them and explained the magic school. Maeve, his mother, stared at the parchment with disbelief. Hubert, can you believe this? Magic? Hubert picked up the letter and examined it closely. Do you think it's a prank? Maybe one of Dylan's friends? I don't have many friends, Dylan reminded them softly. His parents exchanged worried looks. Could their son have been tricked? You can write a reply, Hubert said, still skeptical. But you're not allowed to go with strangers, understand? Of course, Dylan replied eagerly. After dinner, on their day off, his parents watched solemnly while he carefully wrote the response. They said nothing. He was a child and curious. A reply letter couldn't hurt. He set the finished letter by the living room window and waited. A whole day passed with no owl arriving. Don't be sad. Maeve comforted him as she noticed him glancing at the window repeatedly. Maybe Santa will leave you a magic-related gift when Christmas comes. Dylan froze. No, Mom. What month is it? Don't give me false hope until Christmas. But he only smiled weakly and kept watching the sky. Chapter 3. The Nature of the Transfiguration Spell. It's okay, Mom. I don't need any presents. I hope Santa brings them to you instead. Dylan offered the comforting words to his hesitant parents. With his cheat code, getting into Hogwarts felt certain. He was eager to know whether the owl had taken the letter so he could go to Diagon Alley as soon as possible. Maeve's eyes shone. Oh, my baby is so sweet, she breathed. She resolved to save up and buy him something special for Christmas. Hubert was about to say something reassuring when a soft tapping sounded at the window. They all turned. An owl stood on the sill outside, tilting its head and staring intently at the envelope on the table. An owl? Maeve exclaimed. Is it here for the letter? The bird pecked at the glass again, a clear, polite knock. Hubert, open the window, Maeve urged, more anxious than Dylan. Hubert opened it, and instead of flying away, the owl hopped in and perched on the envelope with its claws. Another knock came at the front door. The three of them exchanged glances and looked toward the entrance. Hubert and Maeve looked uneasy. Dylan stood and walked to the door in large strides, taking in a steadying breath. Which professor could it be? He opened the door. The first thing he saw was a long, dark green robe. He looked up and met the face of a middle-aged woman with a stern, lined expression and square glasses. Good day. I apologize for the intrusion. I couldn't find your doorbell, so I knocked, she said. Dylan managed a tight smile. That's all right. May I ask who you are? Mr. Hawkwood, I received your reply. I am Minerva McGonagall, Professor of Transfiguration at Hogwarts. At the sight of Dylan, McGonagall's expression softened briefly, then something like puzzlement crossed her face. For a moment, it seemed as if she sensed an odd signature, an aura, about him. Dylan felt it too. His heart surged with excitement and a nervous thrill. Standing before a master of magic while carrying 3 of the unforgivable curses in his memory was unnerving. Professor McGonagall seemed used to that sort of reaction and did not stare for long. She followed him inside and greeted Hubert and Maeve with a warm smile. Professor McGonagall, Hubert began, once the woman was seated. To be honest, we're still getting used to all of this. Magic. I understand perfectly, McGonagall said. That is one reason for my visit. If you had not replied, the school would still have sent someone in the days before term to escort young wizards from Muggle families to Diagon Alley, she added. Then, with a small flick of her wand, she transformed the notebook on the table into an alarm clock. Its hands began to tick. The alarm rang once. Dylan reached over and switched it off. Hubert and Maeve finally believed. Dylan was surprised too. After turning off the alarm, he looked at McGonagall. Is this the sort of transfiguration you'll teach me? That's right. You will learn transfiguration after term begins, she said. Do you wonder whether transfiguration can change living things, or whether it can create illusions that lack real essence? Dylan pressed on. Can magic truly change the essence of a living being, or is it only superficial? McGonagall's eyes brightened with interest. She studied him a moment. Magic cannot truly alter the fundamental nature of a living being, she said. It may attempt to mimic or involve that essence, but there are limits. So, that alarm clock looks and acts like an alarm clock, but at core it's still a notebook? Dylan asked. You could think of it that way, McGonagall nodded. And you asked why it rang. Because I wanted an alarm clock that would remind me. The magic fulfilled the form I envisioned, and it included the function. Dylan frowned. Function? The essence of transfiguration lies in the combined effect of mind and magic, McGonagall explained. Magic provides the power to reshape. Consciousness, your understanding and intent, provides the structure. If you want a transformed object to do more than look right, you must know it thoroughly, she continued. If you transfigure a living creature, you must also account for its instincts and habitual reactions. Magic supplies the foundation, but your mind determines whether the change is complete. Dylan, who had lived 2 lives and carried unusual knowledge of the unforgivable curses, understood the idea quickly. Consciousness was like a score, and magic like the instruments. Casting a spell was like performing the music. The wand and the incantation act as the conductor. If the score was wrong or the instruments faulty, the piece would not be played correctly. When you cast a transfiguration, McGonagall said, the more fully and precisely you can imagine an object, its shape, its inner workings, its purpose, the more complete the transformation will be. If you only picture the shell of an alarm clock, you will get a shell. If you imagine the ticking, the alarm, the mechanism, then the transformed object will display those functions. Dylan nodded, picturing the notebook and the alarm it had become. The difficulty in transfiguration, he realized, was not just in the wand work, but in completing the image in his own mind. The magic could carry him only as far as his understanding allowed. Chapter 4. Can Gringotts be shorted? It's all right if you don't understand it yet, Professor McGonagall said softly, seeing Dylan lost in thought. You'll have plenty of time to think about it once you're at Hogwarts and begin your formal studies. She sensed his silence as puzzlement and offered reassurance. The question you asked touches the very roots of magic, something many witches and wizards never consider until after graduation. For a moment, her stern features softened, and the faintest smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. For such a young wizard to have that kind of insight the first time he encounters magic is remarkable. Once you're enrolled, if you have any questions about transfiguration, come and talk to me. I would be very pleased. Oh, really, Professor? Dylan's eyes lit up. Of course. McGonagall nodded. Excellent. Connections, +1, Dylan thought, secretly delighted. He had a whole basket of questions about transfiguration, things no Muggle child should really be asking before ever seeing the wizarding world. He'd been hesitant to pester professors constantly, but now that McGonagall had invited him, he felt a lot better. McGonagall, for her part, was pleased too. Such a clever little wizard might, if he stayed on a straight path, even have the makings of a future teacher at Hogwarts. She rose and said, "All right. Remember to take your reply letter. We should be off." The Hokewood couple hesitated for a moment, then agreed to let Dylan attend Hogwarts. "This is the family's savings," his mother said, handing him a backpack. "Being a wizard must be expensive. Take all of this." "Thank you, Mum. I'll study hard and look after you both when you're old," Dylan said earnestly. His mother, Maeve, looked moved. "Go on now. Don't keep the professor waiting." "Professor McGonagall, are we going to Diagon Alley now?" Dylan asked. "Yes, we can apparate or use flue powder, but this place is secluded. There are no fireplaces nearby, so flue powder won't work." McGonagall took his hand. "Hold on to me very tightly." The world shifted. Dylan felt himself lighten and the space around them twist. He gripped her hand hard. The strange sensation faded, and a sudden roar of voices rushed into his ears. A wave of nausea rose up his throat. He swallowed and managed to force it down, only to feel a stronger urge to be sick. "Ugh!" he choked. McGonagall seemed accustomed to the reaction. She flicked her wand and a small charm eased his stomach. That's how most people react to their first apparition. "Don't fight it. You'll get used to it." "We've arrived," she said with a small smile. Dylan steadied himself and opened his eyes. Before them stood a small, grubby pub squeezed between 2 tidy buildings, out of place even on a busy street. "The Leaky Cauldron," McGonagall said. "It appears on a London street visible only to witches and wizards. Stay close to me." She tried to let go, but Dylan's grip tightened. McGonagall paused, then led him inside. Behind the bar, the landlord toweled a glass and greeted her with a grin. "Not for me today, Minerva. I've got a customer." "I have a student with me," McGonagall replied, nodding toward Dylan and motioned for him to follow. They walked around the bar and stepped into a walled courtyard. Dylan eyed the pub and frowned. Isn't there magic for cleaning? He asked. Why is the leaky cauldron so dirty? Why does the landlord use a rag instead of magic? McGonagall chuckled. There's a difference between having spells and using them. Many wizards don't bother with such things. Of course, I'm an exception. A voice from nearby added, That's why I never drink here. There's a small diner that's cleaner and quite good. And little one, no drinking for minors. I understand, Professor McGonagall, Dylan replied with a small smile. McGonagall flicked her wand again. Pay attention. You won't learn apparition until you're 17, which lets you go straight into Diagon Alley. Until then, you'll need to enter through the leaky cauldron. She tapped the bricks with her wand as she instructed. Count 3 bricks up from the wall brick above the rubbish bin, then 2 across, and tap 3 times. The bricks trembled and slid apart, revealing an archway and, beyond it, a bustling shopping street. Diagon Alley looked at first like any other market, except every passerby was a witch or wizard, and every shop had an antique charm to it. We need to go to Gringotts first and change the money in your backpack into wizarding currency, McGonagall said, glancing at his load. Your parents love you very much, she added. Yes, I love them very much too, Dylan said, smiling. A fine line appeared at the corner of McGonagall's eye. Come along. She led him straight to Gringotts. Above the second door, an ominous warning read, Enter, stranger, but take heed. Passing through the doors, they stepped into a bright marble hall. Behind long counters sat goblins, hurriedly making notes in large ledgers. Professor McGonagall, how may I help you? One goblin asked, smiling widely at the sight of a Hogwarts teacher. Just need to exchange some galleons, she replied. The goblin's smile froze at the mention of exchanging money. Exchanging money? Then I won't bother you, he said and left, his enthusiasm gone. McGonagall glanced at Dylan. Don't take it personally. Goblins have their ways. Dylan nodded. They seem to only care about money. Kind of like my dad's manager. McGonagall patted his head. The rest of the exchange went smoothly. Most of the goblins avoided looking Dylan directly in the eye, probably assuming anyone exchanging Muggle currency must be Muggle-born. That historical tension between goblins and wizards didn't mean they looked down on Muggle-borns, but it did make interactions awkward at times. Dylan counted out his new coins and squinted. Pounds exchange for galleons at 1 to 5, he murmured. If that's true, then investing in a few stocks would make me rich. He considered the possibilities. Either the goblins truly had little interest in understanding the pound's buying power, or they were simply very greedy, or perhaps blissfully ignorant about economics. If he ever got the chance, he thought with a grin, he wouldn't exactly short Gringotts. But he might like to give these uneducated fellows a crash course in the beauty of economics. Chapter 5. Oh my God, you little wizard are a lunatic. Dylan didn't have much money. What he did have, though, were his parents' life savings, enough to convert into about 2,000 galleons. He hadn't intended to turn all of it into wizarding currency. He wanted to keep a principal sum in reserve. Still, he converted 500 pounds into 100 galleons to carry on his person. That small exchange earned him several cold looks from the goblins behind the counters. As expected, Muggle-born young wizards tended to be poorer than some of the others. Let's go, the train tickets, Professor McGonagall said, leading Dylan to the counter and buying his Hogwarts express fare. At King's Cross, you'll need to find the 3rd pillar by the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Don't be afraid. Run straight at it, and you'll pass through to platform 9 3/4. Dylan nodded. Under her guidance, he then went to the wand shop. He looked up at the sign hanging over the door, established 382 BC. The storefront was narrow and cluttered. Dylan clicked his tongue. Hasn't this place been standing like that for centuries? Don't worry, McGonagall replied with a smile. Wizarding buildings are not so easily ruined. The Ollivander family's workmanship is not just in the wands. This place won't collapse either. She pushed the door open. Inside, an old man was rummaging through a pile of wand boxes, his back turned and his coat rumpled. The bell chimed, and he straightened, turning to see Professor McGonagall. 9.5 inches, fur, dragon heartstring. Oh, Professor McGonagall, what a pleasure to see you, and to have another young wizard visit my shop. McGonagall took Dylan's hand and nudged him forward. Please choose a suitable wand for him, she said. I need to buy some school supplies. After you've chosen, wait for me by the door." "All right, Professor." When McGonagall left, Mr. Ollivander smiled at the boy. "My young man, are you ready to begin? Which hand do you favor?" "I'm right-handed," Dylan said. "Very good. Just a moment." Ollivander sorted through a stack of boxes and produced one. "Try this." Dylan held the wand and, out of habit, made a slight sweeping motion. For an instant, muscle memory surged, and he felt as if he were about to cast Avada Kedavra. He forced himself to stop, tamped the spell down, and instead gave the wand a light flick. A gust of wind exploded from the tip and sent the neat rows of wand boxes toppling. A shower of boxes clattered to the floor. Ollivander, unruffled, tapped his own wand and said, "Reparo." The boxes stitched themselves back together and floated up into their original positions. He frowned. "This one doesn't suit you." He picked another. Dylan took it and flicked. A tongue of magical flame leapt out. "The magic in you responds unpredictably," Ollivander muttered, taking the wand back. One by one, he handed Dylan wands, 7, 8, sometimes more. Each time, the results were different and dramatic. Wind, sparks, flames, shockwaves, even small concussive blasts. Every attempt caused some mess or small disaster that Ollivander had to undo with practiced gestures. Dylan's heart pounded. He began to wonder if the fact that he had learned the most powerful of the unforgivable curses before he had even properly mastered a wand had something to do with it. Were the wands resisting him, or was something else happening inside his magic? "Don't worry, my boy," Ollivander said when he saw Dylan's tense face. "I have many wands here. There will always be one that suits you." Dylan forced a laugh. "I'm sorry for the trouble. It's my business to help a customer, and you're certainly not the most troublesome I've seen," Ollivander said, and resumed his search, moving from the lowest shelves to the highest. "This one isn't right. Neither is this. Try this one." He took down a wand and handed it to Dylan. When Dylan waved it, a violent surge of energy erupted, and a shockwave hurtled toward Ollivander. The old man calmly dissolved it with a precise counterspell, but Dylan felt the raw power trembling inside him. Why, in the moment the wand was bonding, could he produce an effect comparable to offensive magic without meaning to? Ollivander handed him another. This time, the wand produced an explosive blast that sent dust and papers flying. Ollivander reacted quickly with emergency measures and quelled the detonation before it could cause real harm. Dylan could feel his magic fluctuating, unpredictable, and intense. Each time he released it, different phenomena, flames, shockwaves, detonations, appeared without any deliberate incantation. He was trying different wands to see whether, at the moment magic flowed into a wand, he could guide or shape the resulting effect by some method. He hoped to find a pattern. "Wait, what are you doing?" Ollivander barked suddenly. "I'm trying to see if, when magic is released during wand selection, I can control the effect," Dylan explained. Ollivander's eyes widened until they were very serious. He dropped the box he was holding and strode over, taking the wand from Dylan's hand and gripping his wrist. "What did you say? My heavens, you, young man, are simply a lunatic." He looked genuinely alarmed and a little astonished. "Don't do that anymore. You're attempting what amounts to inventing spells, and that's extremely dangerous. It's not something you should be doing at all." "The invention of spells?" Dylan repeated. "Yes," Ollivander said, keeping a firm hold on the wand and watching Dylan intently. "In the earliest days, wizards did something like that. Before my family began making standard wands, the first spellwrights would let magic vent freely and observe the patterns it made. From those repeated effects, they would formalize the motions, sounds, and intent into spells. But letting magic loose like that can be fatal." Chapter 6. Just because I know the unforgivable curse doesn't mean I'm an extreme person. Many wizards have died trying to push magic further. Young wizard, you don't want to die young and leave your family behind, do you? Ollivander's gaze was intense as he fixed on Dylan. Dylan blinked. He actually thought that researching new spells wouldn't necessarily lead to disaster. That confidence came from his thorough mastery of the 3 unforgivable curses. As supremely aggressive spells, the Unforgivables contained so much power that, since he could control them completely, what other spells could be more dangerous? Maybe a few, but certainly not many. "I understand, sir. Thank you for the warning," Dylan said. Still, He didn't plan to pursue reckless experimentation until he had a firmer grasp of the magic system. As Ollivander spoke, one sentence stuck with him. Magic has its own sentience. Uncontrolled magic will inevitably become chaotic. If he couldn't sufficiently suppress and guide it, excessive extraction and tinkering could very well produce an obscurus. If such a thing wasn't even affected by the 3 unforgivable curses, he thought, all the more reason to be careful. Only after he gave Ollivander his assurance did the wand maker continue searching for a suitable wand. You truly are, very bold, yes. You are a very bold young wizard. Ollivander pulled 3 wand boxes from a shelf, then went deeper into the shop and returned with 7 more, arranging them on the table. I think I have an idea of the type of wand that will suit you, he said. Try these 3 first. Dylan tested them one by one. Between tries, Ollivander couldn't help asking, Young wizard, do you know why I have you try so many different wands? To find the one most compatible with me, to help stabilize the magic inside me. Dylan answered, drawing out a beautifully patterned wand and flicking it, producing a faint pop. Very well said, Ollivander's eyes shone. He closed the 3 boxes on the far right and pushed another set toward Dylan. A compatible wand is important, yes, but its true purpose is to restrain you from casting chaotic magic. Dylan tried 2 more, but Ollivander seemed dissatisfied. Please, continue. Young wizards tend to release the magic inside them recklessly when they don't yet know spells, Ollivander said, handing over another wand. His tone grew complex as his eyes drifted toward the shop ceiling. If that aimless, chaotic magic isn't properly guided, for example through a spell, and instead just lashes out as you did, it can cause very terrible consequences. This one is not for you. He handed Dylan a 4th wand. The point is, a wand must prevent a young wizard from dumping magic indiscriminately when they haven't learned self-control. I see. Dylan nodded, waving the wand and, predictably, setting off another small series of explosions. He felt like some kind of demolition expert. It's fine. There are plenty of wands. Ollivander smiled and handed him another. The moment Dylan took it, his spirits lifted. The magic inside him seemed to come alive with this wand. Almost without resistance, his power flowed into it. The wand drew the energy in and suddenly spat a ball of deep, dark light from its tip. The black glow slithered like tentacles from some underworld, swirling around Dylan twice and giving him a genuine start. For a moment he feared he had somehow used one of the unforgivable curses. The light dissipated quickly and left no lasting effect. Ollivander raised an eyebrow and showed a row of teeth. Ha! 13¼ inches. You would. Thestral tail hair. It seems death and great power will follow you, young wizard. You do realize, Ollivander went on, voice softer, you are the sort of wizard with exceptional talent who is also easily led astray. You could walk a path with no return. Dylan wanted to roll his eyes at the bluntness, but he held himself in check. It was all those damn unforgivable curses, he thought. How could that make him extreme? Since he transmigrated to this world, he had only wanted to buy some stocks and live a quiet life. Thestral tail hair is hard to come by nowadays, Ollivander continued, handing Dylan another wand. These are from my youth. Legendary wand? Dylan's mind flickered to the obvious thought, the Elder Wand. He asked casually, Thestral, are they a magical creature? Ollivander chuckled. No, I didn't pluck one bald, if that's what you're thinking. He laughed and shook his head. When I was young, I wanted to recreate the power of that legendary wand. I took the strongest tail hairs I could from each Thestral I encountered. Admittedly, in those days I killed the ones I caught. He added in a firmer tone, Of course, you mustn't learn from that. Random killing is not acceptable now, young wizard. Dylan knew how most wizards treated magical creatures, often as raw materials to be harvested. Only later did the wizarding world shift towards sustainable practices, and wizards who truly cared for creatures were rare. The idea that these wands were Ollivander's attempts to mimic the Elder Wand gave him a headache. At least, none of the wands he tried had any lingering side effects, and mercifully, none of them came from the tail hair of the same Thestral. Otherwise, he'd have to consider how to buy them all. He knew exactly what trouble that blasted brother wand would stir up. Dylan had no desire to get mixed up in any of that. After trying every wand Mr. Ollivander brought out, The one that fit him best was still the 13 1/4 inch yew wand with a thestral tail hair core. Mr. Ollivander beamed. Those wands had been made by him when he was young and kept all these years. Finally finding a worthy owner for one made him as pleased as an old father seeing his daughter married. He didn't charge Dylan much, just a friendly price, and slipped in a bundle of wand care supplies and a wand case lined with thestral down. "Sir, you only charged me 7 galleons?" Dylan asked, pleasantly surprised at how much he'd gotten for so little. "Yes, young wizard," Mr. Ollivander said. "The Ministry of Magic won't allow young wizards to be charged exorbitant prices for their first wand." Dylan pieced it together. The ministry must be subsidizing the old man. These wands had been lying around for years. No wonder Mr. Ollivander was glad to place one. He even threw in extras. "Thank you, sir. I'll be on my way." Mr. Ollivander watched the boy leave with a smile. Another interesting little fellow, and very well behaved. Outside the shop, Dylan caught sight of Professor McGonagall and hurried over. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Professor." "That's all right," she said with the faintest smile. "Picky wizards often accomplish great things. I look forward to seeing how you do once you're at Hogwarts." She glanced at the large bundle of packages in his arms and arched an eyebrow, though she didn't comment. "Your wand may accompany you for the rest of your life. Don't let it suffer irreparable damage." "I'll take very good care of it," Dylan promised. He felt a childlike excitement beneath his otherwise composed manner, thrilled to be entering the magical world and proud of his new treasure. He peeled back a corner of the thestral down to admire the wand and couldn't help smiling. Seeing him so quietly delighted, Professor McGonagall's eyes warmed for a moment. "Come along. You'll need robes made to measure, though buying one to start with will do." Under her guidance, Dylan visited Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, Pottage's Cauldron Shop, and Flourish and Blots. When they finished, he was practically buried in shopping bags. "Professor, I want to go to that magical creatures shop." Professor McGonagall paused. "You can't take on another pet, can you?" Dylan hadn't actually planned to. In Flourish and Blots, he'd bought more than 30 books at once, all recommended by Professor McGonagall, including several textbooks. Since a professor was accompanying him, he'd seized the opportunity. A chance like that didn't come around often. That, more than pets, filled his hands. What he wanted at the magical creatures shop was information, how to obtain a breeding permit for Umber Shadow. He gave the professor an embarrassed smile. "Mr. Ollivander told me a few things about magical creatures. I'm curious, so I wanted to ask." "Very well," McGonagall said. "Be quick. I'll wait here. Don't be long." "Okay, Professor." Dylan wrangled his bags and darted into the creature shop. After asking a few questions, he didn't linger. He apparated home with Professor McGonagall's help, said goodbye, and carried everything down to his small basement as soon as he arrived. He told his parents about the day in brief, about the wand and the shopping, and then washed up before slipping back into the basement. That's when he noticed a new notification blinking on the system panel. He hadn't seen it before. It must have just refreshed. "Message: You've earned a new achievement." "Huh?" Dylan blinked. He assumed it was for visiting Diagon Alley for the first time, getting a wand, seeing the shops, experiencing apparition, so he hurried to tap the magic scroll icon and open the achievement panel. The newly unlocked achievement description looked as if something had gnawed at it. The letters around the edges were jagged, the strokes twisted and curling. The color was a dark, blackish red, like dried old blood. Degradation. Well done. You've learned how to truly embrace the dark arts. Learned Unforgivable Curses. Achievement reward. Slight affinity for the dark arts. Degradation. Well done. You are now an absolutely qualified evildoer. Learned Unforgivable Curses. Achievement reward. Strong affinity for the dark arts. Achievement. Degradation. Merlin, there is no light left in your heart. You are more wicked than the Dark Lord. Requirement. Learned Unforgivable Curses. Greatly increased affinity for the dark arts. I am the true demon. You have learned a max-level forbidden spell. Well done. You are one step closer to overthrowing the Dark Lord and becoming king yourself. Requirement 1. Mastered Max Level Cruciatus Curse. Requirement 2, Mastered Max Level Imperious. Requirement 3, Mastered Max Level Avada Kedavra. Achievement reward, +3 to max level high-tier forbidden spells. Cast dark arts without negative emotional backlash. Achievement, I am truly a good kid. Description, feigning innocence, deceiving the professors of Hogwarts. Who would have thought you understand the dark arts better than the Dark Lord? Requirement, possess max-level Unforgivable Curses and walk back and forth 10 times in front of a magic professor without arousing suspicion. Achievement reward, your magical traces cannot be indirectly tracked. Dylan stared at the list, heart racing as the words sank in. Chapter 8, Unlimited Currency Storage Area lit up. These are all achievements? Dylan Hawkwood stared, dazed. Coalball, the little umber shadow beside him, stuck out his tongue and gave his hand a wet lick. Moo, the creature murmured. Good boy. Go play by yourself for a while. Dylan stroked the little beast's head and continued through the achievements he'd already unlocked. Dark Arts Double Affinity, 3 max-level Advanced Forbidden Curses, immune to negative emotions while casting Dark Arts? He clicked his tongue. Is this really an achievement system? It feels more like a Dark Arts system in disguise. He scrolled further and found more entries. Achievement, let me see who hasn't bought supplementary materials yet. Description, a young wizard who doesn't read is no good. Requirement, purchase books at Flourish and Blots in Diagon Alley, 1010. Reward, Magic Affinity +1. Achievement, who says shopping is tiring? This shopping trip was great. Description, with money, you must spend at all the big stores. Requirement, first purchase in a shop in Diagon Alley. Reward, 100 galleon, storage space area. Lit up achievement, I'm rich. Description, no galleon is easy to come by unless it's really easy. Requirement, possess your first galleon. Reward, unlimited currency storage area lit up achievement, I am a young wizard. Description, though young, I have already begun the path of wizardry. Requirement, possess your own wand. Reward, wand beautification area, lit up achievement, I am a young wizard. Description, school is about to start, so you must have your uniform. Requirement, possess your own school uniform. Reward, wizard robe beautification area lit up achievement, I am a young wizard. 3. Description, an excellent young wizard prepares their school equipment early. Requirement, possess your own cauldron. Reward, potion affinity +1. Dylan frowned. Why was the dark arts getting such huge boosts while normal magic and potions only got a single point? Still, the rewards were useful, and he began to tally them excitedly. The dark arts boost wasn't just a higher affinity. He now felt he could use the dark arts without being affected by negative emotions. Any unforgivable curse he learned would be easier to master, and the power behind them seemed stronger. He let his mind run wild. With this talent, if he leaned into the dark, Death Eaters wouldn't bow to Voldemort, or even Grindelwald. They'd bow to him. He checked another unlocked achievement, I am really a good child, and read the reward. It prevented anyone from tracing the magical signatures he left behind remotely. In other words, others could only identify his magic by watching him in person. Remote detection methods would be blind. That felt invaluable. If he were ever forced to use an unforgivable curse, as long as he handled the victim directly, no one could later trace the magic back to him. The idea of embracing the dark didn't seem quite so unacceptable anymore. Darkness, he thought wryly, could be very convenient. He still wondered which 3 dark arts the system would grant. At the top of the panel, 3 black orbs floated like tiny stars. He activated them one by one. Each burst with a blinding light, and that familiar rush washed over him, the sensation of mastering not 1, but 3 spells at once. Message, congratulations on mastering the max-level spell, Fiendfire. Message, congratulations on mastering the max-level spell, Morsemordry. Message, congratulations on mastering max-level spell, Parasitic Possession. He knew the first 2 well enough. Fiendfire, an infernal, willful flame capable of destroying Horcruxes, was far more destructive than ordinary fire. It ate through magic itself, and normal water could not quench it. Morsemordre, in this system's description, summoned a skeletal manifestation, more of a terrifying beacon than a simple conjuration that could ward off spirits and frighten lesser creatures. The third, Parasitic Possession, chilled him, a dark arts that could seize a dying being and transfer its essence into another living body, using the latter's life force to prolong the former. What the resulting fusion would look like remained unknown. His mind darted to Professor Quirrell's unnerving double-faced head, and he shivered. He had now learned 6 dark arts in total, each high level, some outright unforgivable: Fiendfire, Crucio, Imperio, Morsmord, Parasitic Possession, and Avada Kedavra. It was a heavy tally. He felt both exhilarated and a little sickened by the scale of what he'd been given. Fortunately, not all rewards were sinister. The Who Says Shopping is Tiring achievement had lit up a new storage option. Dylan clicked the wizard hat icon on the panel, and a new information bar expanded. Name: Dylan Hawkwood. Magic: Fiendfire, Crucio, Imperio, Morsmordra, Parasitic Possession, Avada Kedavra. Items: none. Money: none. Pet: Coal Ball, Umber Shadow. The storage space the system provided meant he could stow items he acquired, anything beyond system-given rewards, under the Items tab. The unlimited currency storage unlocked a Money tab where his galleons could be deposited and accessed through the panel. Dylan realized with a small thrill that his money and possessions could be kept directly inside the system interface. Chapter 9. The cross-dressing area lights up. Dylan Hawkwood decided to try it out. He took a galleon from his backpack, and as expected, the coin vanished the moment he thought about it. On the system panel, the money column now showed his balance. Delighted, Dylan deposited everything he had, his remaining galleons, the pounds his parents had given him, even the value of the items he'd bought, into the system. This thing was great. It didn't need any external device like a space ring, and it couldn't be robbed by others. Best of all, with his money in the system, he wouldn't have to use Gringotts. Getting access to vaults there cost a lot. Every activation, even simple deposits, came with fees. Dylan wasn't about to be taken advantage of. The item bar let him store his purchases freely, which was another relief. He grinned, pleased to see the balance rise and his item slots fill, and prepared to work hard to fill them even more. He scanned the next rewards. He skimmed past things like Magic Affinity and Potion Affinity, and then noticed 2 other entries on the panel under the Wand icon: Wizard Robe Beautification Area and Wand Beautification Area. Clicking them brought up a new page. Name: Dylan Hawkwood. None. 1. Beautiful Wizard Robes. 1. The robe area was dimmed. He'd only just ordered his wizard robe today and wouldn't be able to pick it up for a while. He clicked into the Beautiful Wands entry. It let him spend money to customize his wand's appearance, shape, color, even the color of the magic it produced. At first, Dylan thought it was useless. Then he had a thought. If you could set the color, could you set it to colorless? If his wand could release colorless magic, maybe his dark arts spells would be easier to conceal. He glanced at the price tag and nearly choked. 100 galleons for a single setting change? This system was ridiculous. An achievement system that also had a pay-to-customize element. Dylan looked at the wand on his desk. "I'll wait until I have more money," he muttered. He checked the dimmed Beautiful Wizard Robe entry anyway. It worked similarly, pay to design the robe's look, but it went further. As long as he wore the robe, he could change his own appearance, hairstyle, robe cut, even makeup. Each change cost 100 galleons, and the settings weren't saved. Every time you changed something, you'd have to pay again to return to a previous look. Typical dress-up stuff, Dylan sighed. If it can be solved with money, it's not a problem. These areas will be useful once I've got the funds. In truth, being able to alter wand effects and his outward appearance would be handy for future plans. Still, the sudden introduction of such features made him smirk. Did the system want him to become some sort of Dark Lord, rob Gringotts, and blow his loot on cosmetics? 100 galleons was a lot, worth several £100s. Their family would need time to earn that back. Umber Shadow, seeing his master oscillate between laughter and complaint, let out a small cry. "Moo. Hungry?" Dylan asked, smiling. He took out some food. He hadn't dared buy pet feed at the magical creatures shop earlier. He'd wanted to ask about raising Umber Shadow first. Buying food without the animal might have flagged him to the shopkeeper. Not willing to risk it, he'd avoided it. After feeding Coalball, Dylan returned the pet to the system's pet space. "Licenses aren't easy to get," he told the sleeping creature. "I'll sleep first." That night, he buried his head in his pillow and slept. The next morning, he pulled out the books he'd bought at Flourish and Blots. There was a month before term began. He planned to use the time to review and, if possible, learn a few spells in advance. He wondered briefly whether Harry Potter would be in the same year as him, but it wasn't something he dwelt on. He'd find out when school started. With mastery of 6 max-level spells under his belt, learning basic, standard spells felt like tearing through dry leaves. He settled on the levitation charm and tried to make the textbook in front of him float. Wand in hand, he tapped lightly. Wingardium Leviosa. Magic flowed smoothly into the wand and out toward the book. The charm took hold on the first try. Dylan's eyes widened in surprise. Then, because his output was too strong, he kept pouring magic into the spell. The book quivered, and with a thud, fell off the desk. Huh. I need to control the strength better, he muttered, excited. This was his first time casting a releasable spell, and he couldn't stop practicing, trying to achieve the delicate balance the charm required. He noticed another detail as he studied. The levitation charm had appeared on his panel, but unlike the other spells, it showed a proficiency indicator. Levitation charm, 3/10. It seemed the system tracked how skilled he was with each spell. Chapter 10. Departure to Hogwarts. The holidays passed quickly. On the day Dylan was due to leave, his parents drove him to King's Cross Station themselves. Be careful, and when you get there, Maeve began. Did you bring everything? Hubert asked. Don't worry, Dylan said. I've got all my personal things with me. The rest were already sent to the school. I'll be careful. He smiled and added, You don't need to overwork yourselves. I'll become a wizard and earn a lot of money someday, so don't tire yourselves out. You good son, Maeve said, rubbing his head. Now don't be late. Hurry along, Hubert warned. Dylan nodded. I'll write from the academy. Keep an eye out for my owl. Mommy will, his mother replied with a little laugh. After farewells, Dylan walked into the station with only a travel backpack. He'd been to King's Cross before. His parents took him on trips when they had time, so he easily found his way to the third pillar between platforms 9 and 10. He watched for a while. Muggles bustling past paid no attention to the spot. If they glanced that way at all, they quickly averted their eyes. A small wizard dashed through the pillar, and nobody reacted. Dylan took a deep breath. Walking straight into a solid-looking wall was still a bit unnerving. Go, he told himself. He closed his eyes and plunged forward. For a moment, it felt like entering a void. A few steps later, the emptiness faded and the world brightened. A scarlet train steamed into the station. Dylan blinked, thinking of the silent high-speed and maglev trains of the Muggle world. Wizards hadn't achieved that kind of technology, unless they'd enchanted the express to be faster. The carriage filled quickly with children and parents. Dylan had no one to wait for, so when the train stopped, he moved to the nearest carriage and climbed aboard. On the Hogwarts Express, you could board any carriage. Seats weren't assigned. He found a compartment, set his backpack down on the left seat, and sat. Looking out the window, he pulled a book from his inventory. Most of his things were stored there. It saved on shipping, and it was convenient. He had spent much of the holidays studying. He'd learned that wizardry wasn't about memorizing incantations. To master a spell, you had to understand its underlying principles. Only then could a spell reach its highest potential. The book was one he'd started before leaving, the one Professor McGonagall had recommended in the bookstore, A Concise Guide to Transfiguration. He opened it to the bookmark and continued reading. The guide explained the fundamentals of transfiguration and pointed out common pitfalls. Some sections covered advanced transfiguration, material that Dylan couldn't fully absorb without an instructor. But even the basic chapters were detailed, moving from simple concepts to deeper theory. There were practical notes on using transfiguration in combat, too. He read the combat applications with particular interest. The examples were practical and inventive. Dylan's mind, already honed by 6 max-level spells and the experiences of 2 lives, ran ahead of the text. He thought of the wand beautification feature his system had given him and imagined ways to combine the two, some of them far less scrupulous than the book's scenarios. The book's practical examples are vivid, he thought, but they don't cover every sneaky possibility. As he mused, The compartment door slid open with a cheerful swish, and two red-haired boys poked their heads in. "Hey, hello, are you the only one here?" one asked. "Do you mind if we sit?" the other added. "No, come on in," Dylan said, glancing between them. The pair tumbled into the compartment and began to chatter. "Thanks, I'm Fred." "No, I'm Fred, he's George." After a brief noisy squabble over names, they noticed Dylan was watching and turned back to him. "What's your name?" one asked. "Dylan," he answered casually. Hearing their names made him realize who they were, the Weasley twins. If they were on the Express, that meant their younger brother would be in his year. "Are you a first year?" one of them asked. "Then you'll be in the same year as our brother." "What house do you think he'll be in?" the other mused, eyeing Dylan's book. "You definitely look like a Ravenclaw." "I think so too," the other agreed. "Who would read on the journey? This looks like one of those proper school books, not a textbook." "I've got a feeling about the Sorting Hat and this little wizard," Fred said dramatically. "I already said that," George protested. "I agreed too," Fred shot back. Dylan smiled to himself as they bickered. Ron Weasley and Harry Potter were in the same year, he recalled in fragments from the stories he'd read. He couldn't remember every detail of their later adventures, but the presence of the twins and the easy camaraderie of the compartment made the beginning of the school year feel real, in a way that the book alone could not. Outside, the platform blurred into the countryside, and the scarlet carriages hummed along. Dylan turned another page, letting the words guide him as the Weasleys argued friendly nonsense, and the train carried them all toward Hogwarts. Chapter 11. If only we could take the sword of Gryffindor. Woo! After waiting on the platform, the Hogwarts Express let out a long, melodic whistle and began to move. Steam rolled off its chimney as the train pulled out of the station and headed across the endless fields. Dylan watched the countryside slide by, spring in full swing, everything alive and bright. "Junior, we're off to find some friends to play with," one of the red-haired twins announced. "You can keep reading quietly," the other shot back. "It's your fault for being so noisy. Your mouth never stops." "It's your fault. I was only answering you." Dylan ignored the twins' bickering. They scurried out of the compartment to join the throng of returning students. Dylan used the chance to pull his little wizard robe on and settle back with his book, stealing glances out the window between chapters. Eventually, the train slowed and halted. The twins returned, grabbing their trunks. "Junior, is that your only backpack?" one asked, peering at Dylan's modest pack. They'd all gone home for the holidays and weren't bringing much, but Dylan's small load drew their attention. "I had the heavier stuff sent ahead by Owl Post," he said. He was still a child, no point hauling what could be mailed. If he weren't worried about his system being exposed, he'd have stashed everything in his inventory, but discretion was safer. "Ah," they said, nodding. The three of them climbed down from the carriage. A cold wind hit them. It knifed through Dylan's sleeves and made him shiver. "Why is it so cold?" he muttered, then raised his wand and flicked it. "Thermo Enchantia." Warmth spread around him. The chill seemed to evaporate. The twins hurried back over. "Hey, Junior, quick, do one for us." "Cast one on me, too." Squished between them and half out of breath, Dylan obliged with another flick. "Thermo Enchantia." The warmth enveloped them both, and the twins finally released their grip. "Thanks, you're a lifesaver," George said, rubbing his hands together. "We're going to the first year's meeting spot now." "Okay, find us later at Hogwarts and we'll play," Fred added, already slipping into the crowd. Dylan watched them go, shook his head with a small smile, and followed the line toward where Hagrid was waiting. Hagrid was enormous. The first time Dylan saw him properly, he'd been surprised, half-giant indeed. Hagrid carried a lantern and turned to lead the procession through the dark, walking them toward the docks where the small boats waited. The lantern's glow wasn't enough for everyone. The path was black between the trees, and a squat first year in front nearly stumbled into the mud. "Lumos," Dylan muttered, and the tip of his wand blossomed with a soft, non-blinding light that cleared the immediate area. The little wizards behind him breathed easier and glanced at him with quiet thanks. Hagrid led them through a stand of trees until the group came to the edge of the Black Lake. They stopped. Across the water, Hogwarts rose, towering spires against the night, stone walls ancient and solid, lights twinkling from the windows like stars mirrored in the lake. "It's Hogwarts," a small voice breathed. "It's really spectacular." Dylan turned to see the speaker, a round-faced, nervous-looking boy with a flushed face. "Hello, I'm Neville," he said shyly. "Your Lumos earlier helped me a lot. I might have fallen without it. Thank you." Dylan smiled. "It was nothing. I just lit my own way." Neville's cheeks went a shade deeper. He fidgeted, then blurted, Do you think the sword of Gryffindor can be used by someone like me? I'm not sure I'd be able to pull it if it needed to be pulled." Dylan's interest pricked. He'd been thinking about weapons and magic lately, about whether spells could be used to control arms the way swordmasters in old tales could manipulate blades. He'd even been studying the old techniques of the Shoe Mountain sword immortals and wondering if a magical sword like Gryffindor's might be a perfect subject for his experiments. "What's your name?" he asked. "Dylan." "Hello, Dylan," Neville said, relief and hope warring across his face. He seemed desperate for an ally, but too shy to ask outright. Dylan realized this timid boy might just be the kind of companion who'd cling to any offered friendship. "Neville, would you like to share a boat with me?" Dylan asked before Neville could talk himself out of it. "You're the first person I've talked to on the way here." Neville brightened at once. "Of course. I was going to ask." They joined the queue for the boats. The black lake looked darker the closer they got, as if its surface stretched into an endless void. A prickle of unease ran through Dylan. He preferred firm ground. Still, he wasn't too worried about creatures in the water. He had a few tricks, and more importantly, a handful of powerful spells stored in his system. He'd even learned to alter spell attributes. If anyone leapt out to frighten him, he half-joked, he could afford to make a spell colorless for a price and hit them with something serious. "It cost me 100 galleons to change the color of a spell," he muttered, mostly to himself, "but then no one would ever try that stunt again." "Now boarding," Hagrid called, and the first years began to step into the little boats. "It's our turn. Let's get on," Neville whispered, voice shaking with nerves and excitement at once. They stepped into the boat together, side by side, and pushed off toward the castle, the lights of Hogwarts growing brighter with every stroke. Chapter 12. You Know Such Difficult Magic? After they climbed into the boat, Neville sat rigid, his cheeks tight and his hands clenched around the bench. He didn't dare move toward the edge. 2 other first years climbed in with them, and once the 4 of them were seated, no one was rowing, but the little boat began to move. Dylan looked over the side and, to his surprise, saw a huge squid. 2 suckers were latched to the bottom of the boat. The squid swam silently beneath the surface, guiding them past cliffs and through a curtain of ivy until the boat finally eased up to the shore. The squid dove straight down into the lake and vanished. "I wonder if that squid would taste good stir-fried," Dylan muttered, smacking his lips. Neville jumped out of the boat and hurried up the dock to the shore. "Phew." He let out a relieved breath. Dylan fell into step behind him and warned, "Don't run off. Make sure you haven't left anything behind." Neville froze and began patting his robes and pockets frantically. His face went pale as he realized what was missing. "Oh no, my Trevor is gone again." "Again?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. He remembered Neville losing his toad on the train before. Hermione had helped look for it then, which is how she met Harry and Ron. Dylan had wondered why Hermione hadn't come to his compartment to search, but now he guessed she'd found the toad halfway. Still, Dylan had a strange sense about life around him. Because of his parasitic possession, he could pick up on nearby life force auras to some extent. He hadn't deliberately scanned the other students, but thinking back, he didn't remember sensing any other life forms besides Neville. "I didn't feel another life force around you on the way here," he said. "Did you lose Trevor when you got off the train?" Neville's panic made sweat bead at his temple. He scratched his head and tried to remember, but came up empty. "It might have fallen off somewhere on the way, or it could still be on the train. I'm thinking it's the latter." "If it's on the train, the house elves will send him back to Hogwarts," Dylan reasoned. "But," Neville started. "No buts," Dylan cut in. "We can't go back now. We'll just have to wait until tomorrow." Neville's face fell. "That's the only choice? I heard Hogwarts is full of dangers. I'm really scared something will happen to Trevor." Dylan felt a pang of helplessness seeing Neville so upset. How about this? I'll try using Axio. If he's nearby, I can fetch him, but if he's still on the train or fell off far away, there's not much we can do. You can use Axio, Neville brightened instantly, then burst into hope. Oh, please try. Don't expect miracles. Dylan waved his wand. Axio Trevor! A ribbon of magic shot from the tip of his wand toward the boat. A very plump toad flew up out of it. Before the creature reached them, Dylan let the charm fade and made a soft sound. Croak. Trevor landed on the ground and croaked. Neville dashed forward, scooped him up, and tears sprang to his eyes. Oh my goodness, Dylan, you're amazing. You know such difficult magic. Thank you so much. Trevor must have fallen off and followed me all the way. Neville sniffled happily, clutching his fat, ugly toad. Other first years were starting to move on, so Dylan shook his head. Come on, we'd better hurry or we'll fall behind. Neville trotted along, still pointing at the toad. Don't run off next time, you hear me? Croak, Trevor answered. Dylan looked at the toad, so squat and ugly, and privately thought his own pet was far more attractive. My little Umber Shadow is prettier, he muttered. Even if Umber Shadow was a black cat with an unsettling mien and a weird mooing meow, so what? Professor McGonagall turned into a cat, so in a way, Umber Shadow was dignified too. And besides, Umber Shadow wasn't just a normal cat. It was its own sort of creature. When Dylan and Neville caught up with the rest, the group followed a pebbled path to a large door. Hagrid rapped on it several times. The sound echoed through the hall. The door opened, and Professor McGonagall stood framed in it. She wore a vivid emerald robe, the fabric glossy, and the folds caught perfectly. Her iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun without a hair out of place. Her face was stern, and her eyes sharp. She wore the pointed hat embossed with the school crest. She seemed unapproachable here, quite different from the gentler woman who had shown Dylan around Diagon Alley. Professor McGonagall, these are all the first-year students, Hagrid rumbled. Thank you, Hagrid. You may go. She opened the door wider and led the new students into the entrance hall. Follow me. Dylan stayed near the back of the crowd with Neville, taking in the interior of Hogwarts as they walked. The ancient walls on either side were carved with bas-reliefs that held braziers that lit the way, and Dylan noticed the reliefs were the animals of the four houses, each winged and lifelike as if watching the newcomers. This is even better than watching it in 3D, he thought, remembering a frightening scene with Dementors from the film he had seen when he was younger. Professor McGonagall led them to the threshold of the Great Hall and turned to them. Before you are truly enrolled, you must go through the sorting ceremony. This is extremely important, Professor McGonagall said, her voice sharp and clear. It determines how you will spend your time at school, which house you will join, and the friends you will make. The houses are Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. Once the sorting hat places you into a house, remember this, you will represent that house's honor. Every word you speak and every action you take will help or harm your house's chances of winning the House Cup at the end of the year. Her gaze swept the assembled first years and paused on Dylan. He returned a harmless, innocent smile. For a moment, a faint smile touched McGonagall's eyes. Then it was gone. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly, she continued. It will be held in front of all the teachers and students, so tidy yourselves up. She turned and left. After a few seconds of excited chatter among the new students, a startled cry went up from the crowd. Ah! Ghosts! The hall fell silent. Dylan looked up and saw more than a dozen ghosts drifting out of the walls, their translucent faces curious about the newcomers. A few floated down among the first years near the edges of the hall, whispering and bobbing as they went. The students nearest them trembled. Dylan wondered idly whether the sight of the dark mark, Morsmordre, would intimidate the ghosts, when one ghost separated itself from the group and drifted down toward him. Oh, I sense a peculiar aura, it exclaimed, drawing close to Dylan's face. When the ghost met Dylan's eyes, it gave a high, surprised wail and shot away. The other ghosts, after a moment's hesitation, glanced at Dylan and hurried off in pursuit. Neville, standing beside Dylan, squealed in fright and clutched his toad so tightly it squeaked. Lifu, Neville's toad, rolled its eyes and kicked its little legs frantically. Neville, Dylan said softly, the ghost's gone. Is it gone? Neville whispered, still squeezing his eyes shut. I don't dare look. Dylan shook his head, amused, as Professor McGonagall returned. All right, young wizards, she said. The ceremony is about to begin. Form a single file and follow me. At her voice, Neville cautiously opened one eye. Dylan, however, was already moving forward and joined the line. Led by McGonagall, the first years filed into the Great Hall. All the students and teachers already seated turned to scrutinize them as they entered. Dylan barely noticed them. He was looking up at the enchanted ceiling instead. The stars above them shifted slowly, not gimmicky projections, but a living, breathing sky. He couldn't help smiling. Magic, he thought, was really something. Dumbledore stood and went over the school's prohibitions. The Forbidden Forest was off limits, where certain rooms and corridors were out of bounds, and so on. When Dumbledore finished, McGonagall opened the parchment in her hand. Students whose names are called, please step forward. I will place the sorting hat on your head, and the hat will decide your house. The first name called was Hermione Granger. Dylan found himself watching her as she stepped forward, undeniably impressed by how poised she was, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He had come to Hogwarts for 3 practical reasons: understand magic, learn magic, and use magic to make a fortune. Everything else could wait. If Lord Voldemort showed up, he'd put him under Imperius and get on with business. Voldemort's chaos would only harm the market. He had even half-seriously considered recruiting some Death Eaters to work for him later. He was still lost in thought when McGonagall called his name. Dylan Hawkwood! He blinked back to the present and stepped forward. He sat on the little stool, and the sorting hat was placed on his head. It was a cramped, musty thing that smelled faintly of old leather and history. Oh, my goodness, such an intelligent young wizard, the hat said in his mind. You seem to know many spells. Do you want me to try Ravenclaw? It suggested. Dylan raised an eyebrow and answered in his head. If I go to Gryffindor, can you lend me the sword of Gryffindor that's stuck inside you? I've been studying ways to use magic to control weapons. The hat gave a sharp little chuckle. What? How are you already researching such advanced magic? No, how do you know about the sword? That's not something a first year normally knows. Perhaps I practiced a bit of legilimency, the hat mused. Dylan snorted. Oh, go on. Forgive me for saying so, but you're very long-winded, Hat. My goodness, you have a mouth like a Slytherin, the hat exclaimed. Do you want Slytherin? Elite training there might suit you. You've clearly mastered a lot of magical knowledge. I don't want elite education, Dylan replied. Oh, then Ravenclaw? The hat suggested again. Or I sense great courage in you, noble ideals. Maybe Gryffindor, perhaps? Do all 4 houses have inheritances? Dylan asked. He was already thinking in terms of resources and legacies. Ravenclaw's books and knowledge would be useful. You know that too? The hat sounded surprised. In that case, put me in Ravenclaw, Dylan decided. Ravenclaw's legacy would give him the knowledge he wanted. The sorting hat hesitated, then suddenly shouted, very loudly, apparently into the whole hall, Gryffindor. Dylan flinched. How can you decide that without asking me first, he thought, half incredulous. My goodness. The sorting hat seemed scandalized. A first year daring to plot for the inheritances of all 4 houses. You are far too bold. You may only be allowed in Gryffindor. Chapter 14. Dumbledore. Now that you've entered Gryffindor, can you still follow Tom's old path? Dylan was speechless. He had assumed that since Gryffindor kept Godric's sword and had its own house legacy, the other 3 founders must have left legacies too. If he'd been sorted into Ravenclaw, he might have had a chance to explore Ravenclaws. And while Gryffindor's sword was impressive, it wasn't really suitable for him. He wasn't a swordsman. That's great. Dylan, we're in the same house. Amidst the applause, Dylan walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Neville. He hadn't been surprised that the pudgy boy made it into Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall, however, was a little taken aback. After her brief exchange with Dylan before the ceremony, she had assumed he'd go to Ravenclaw. She hadn't expected Gryffindor, but the result pleased her. At least he was one of her students. At the head table, Dumbledore's eyes narrowed slightly, and a small smile touched his lips when he saw Dylan join the Gryffindor feast. Ollivander had been overly cautious, he thought. 2 weeks earlier, Ollivander had written to him, describing the unusual way Dylan had chosen his wand and warning him to be vigilant, to prevent anyone from becoming another Tom Riddle. But Dylan hadn't gone to Slytherin or Ravenclaw. He'd become a chivalrous Gryffindor. A wand, in the end, was only an inclination of magic. With the right guidance, the tragedy of Tom need not repeat itself. Dylan, sitting at the table and noticing Dumbledore's lack of suspicion, felt a little relief. Occlumency was still difficult for him to research, and he worried that trying to conceal thoughts with it now would only draw attention. If he used occlumency on himself and others detected the unusual magic, they would only become curious about what he was hiding. Wouldn't that make him more suspect? Besides, after a whole holiday of study, Dylan had his own verdict. The 3 unforgivable curses were overrated. He had spent the break delving into them. People called those spells cruel, but during the time of the 4 founders, cruelty came from many quarters. The church's purges, witch hunts. Compared to the methods used in those eras, what made Avada Kedavra and Imperio unforgivable? They were only a handful of spells, hardly the pinnacle of dark arts. Much more dangerous arts had been practiced. The records of the truly terrible ones were probably lost long ago, which was why these particular spells had come to be labeled unforgivable. The sorting continued. Harry and the other new students were placed into their houses. The ceremony didn't take long. With a gentle wave from Dumbledore, an extraordinary feast appeared before them. Neville, already hungry, brightened and set to carving the roast in front of him. Dylan, a little absent-minded, cut at his own steak more slowly. If he'd been sorted into Hufflepuff, he mused, he'd probably have food like this all the time. Hufflepuff's kitchen was like a snack street below a dormitory, always within reach. Swish! Sir Nicholas, the fat friar, floated over, and the house ghosts took their places. Dylan felt nothing unusual, but several first years and even some older students shrank back. Nick drifted past Dylan and floated toward Harry a few seats away. Neville, now feeling at ease, chattered away. He was less timid, striking up conversation even while he ate. "You don't know what my great-uncle did to find out I had magic," Neville exclaimed, animated. Dylan listened politely, answering when prompted, while his gaze kept returning to Harry. Little Harry still looked shy, sitting with Ron, but the others crowded around with obvious curiosity. Even a ghost hovering nearby couldn't dampen their excitement. "Dylan, you know so much magic. You must be a pure-blood wizard, right? I didn't expect you'd be in Gryffindor," Neville said loudly. The volume drew glances from the surrounding students. Harry and Ron looked over, and Hermione peered at Dylan with bright interest. "Pure-blood?" Dylan shook his head. "No, I'm from a Muggle family." "A Muggle family? Dylan, you're not joking?" Neville stared, the toad in his arms croaking. "What's there to joke about?" Dylan said with a smile. "I read a lot of books and textbooks over the holidays. I taught myself much of this magic." That confession caused further surprise among the Gryffindors. Who spent their holidays studying? Holidays were for play, not for poring over spell work. But Hermione's eyes lit up. She swallowed a mouthful and looked at Dylan as if she'd found a kindred spirit, then compared their efforts in her head. She had previewed half of the first-year textbooks already and bought extra reference books besides. Hearing Dylan say he'd read less than half of the books he'd bought, especially the first-year texts, she felt a flicker of pride. Then Dylan continued, casual as ever. "Practicing the basics isn't hard. I don't find the textbook material difficult, so I'll probably just listen to the professor explain it once in class. As for things beyond the curriculum, I've been looking at a guide to advanced transfiguration, but some of the problems are too deep. For questions about safely and stably performing live transfiguration, I'll have to wait until term starts and ask Professor McGonagall." Hermione went utterly still. "You're already studying advanced transfiguration?" Hermione's voice rose, incredulous. "How could this person be studying more than me?" Dylan glanced over and realized it was the little girl who'd spoken. He nodded. "Yeah, but advanced transfiguration isn't easy. It takes time." Hermione blinked. She felt a strange, prickly competitiveness toward Dylan. It was just advanced transfiguration. If she had the basics down, she could go deeper later. Dylan, meanwhile, bent his attention back to Neville. "Neville," he said, "when you read the standard book of spells, keep an eye on something. I noticed a discrepancy between it and 18th century spells. Some records conflict." Neville looked baffled. The Standard Book of Spells is our textbook, right? 18th century spells. I've never even heard of that. Dylan smiled. I'll ask the professor after term starts and tell you the details. Conversation died away as everyone digested that exchange. Dylan calmly continued eating while a cluster of wide-eyed first-years stared at him, sensing he was different. When he finished, Dumbledore waved his hand and the plates cleared themselves. The headmaster rose. Term begins today, he said. Remember the restricted areas I mentioned, especially the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor in the library. Do not approach it. Also, do not use magic in the corridors during breaks. It is dangerous. Finally, house Quidditch teams are recruiting. See Madam Hooch if you're interested. Tryouts begin in the 2nd week. Dylan took careful notes of the forbidden areas in his little notebook. It wasn't that he wanted to explore them, quite the opposite. He'd forgotten which parts of the castle were off-limits and now had no reason to go there. What he needed was time to study and deepen his grasp of magic. When the opening feast ended, Percy led the new Gryffindors up to the tower. Dylan and Neville were assigned to the same dormitory. Yay! We get to live together! Neville cheered, then suddenly stopped. Ah, my Leifu! Before Neville could panic, Dylan waved his wand. Leifu, Accio! Leifu floated over at once, but stopped just shy of touching Neville, cutting off whatever glow it had been giving off. Neville didn't care. He scooped Leifu into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dylan didn't mind the roommate arrangement. Having someone he already knew in the same room was easier than meeting complete strangers. Back by his trunks, a house elf had already set out his things. He started to unpack when 3 more boys came in. Hey, I'm Ron, a freckled redhead said, poking his head forward. Hello, Dylan replied. Hi, my name's Harry, another boy added. I'm Siamis, nice to meet you. Dylan nodded. For a moment he realized that Neville had once lived in this room with Harry, and his arrival had shuffled people around. He didn't care. It doesn't matter where you sleep. He was too indifferent to fuss. Having learned 6 top-level dark arts, he wasn't particularly worried about future trouble. If anyone attacked, he thought dryly, he'd start with a Crucio, follow with Fiendfire, and finish with Avada Kedavra. Even without an adult wizard's reserves, a surprise strike would be devastating. Dylan shoved the rest of his unpacking into tomorrow's to-do list. Before bed, he waved his wand. Scourgify. The spell cleaned his bed and himself in one go. He kicked off his shoes and slid under the covers, stretching and letting out a long yawn. Magic really is the ladder of human progress, he murmured to himself. That's still early, he added after checking the time. He intended to see his new owl before class, so after a quick wash with Scourgify, he left the dormitory. Oh, child, good morning. You're up first, the fat lady in the portrait said, yawning sleepily as Dylan passed. Good morning, he replied, and headed for the great hall. He grabbed a glass of milk and 2 slices of toast, spread jam on one, and ate quickly. Then, with his stomach settled, he made his way to the owlery. Hey, Luna, I'm here to see you, he called, stepping into the cool, bird-scented air. After spending some time in the owlery playing with Luna and feeding her a few strips of meat, Dylan returned to the great hall. A few students were trickling in for breakfast. He'd already eaten, so he sat and read until it was almost time for class. With half an hour to spare, he got up and made his way to the Transfiguration classroom, early, because he worried the castle's stairs might confuse the new students. Sure enough, as he climbed the moving stairs, they shifted direction every so often. He passed the same stretch twice. On his 3rd approach, the stairs trembled again, as if about to change course. Dylan narrowed his eyes and raised his wand. Petrificus Totalis. A thin stream of magic left his wand. He didn't have perfect control over the spell. It only stiffened the stairs for a moment. Taking advantage of the pause, Dylan stepped across and jumped onto the platform just as the steps resumed their motion. He glanced back, then pushed open the classroom door. There were already a few students seated, mostly in the middle and back rows. Dylan, not in the mood to fight the crowd, dropped into the front row by the door and set his books on the desk. No sooner had he gotten comfortable than a tabby cat slipped into the room. She moved silently and with a strange, composed elegance. The moment she entered, her bright green eyes locked onto Dylan. A thought danced across his mind. Pretend you don't know Professor McGonagall's animagus form and pet her. Before he could talk himself out of it, Dylan was on his feet. Well, what a cute little tabby. Is this someone's pet? He was only 2 or 3 steps away, so he crouched and reached out. The cat seemed startled, slow to respond. Then she was suddenly in his arms. Her fur was warm under his hand, and for a brief second she closed her eyes, clearly enjoying it. Then she came to her senses, let out a sharp meow, and began to squirm. With a flick, she sprung free, arched through the air, and landed gracefully on the rostrum. She sat, turned, and glared at Dylan. Something unreadable flashed in her green eyes. Dylan tilted his head and played innocent. Whose little tabby is this, then? He sat back down and tried to look nonchalant. If she doesn't like being held, fine. She's not that cute. He forced the words out, but his grin betrayed him. Professor McGonagall, still in cat form, almost lost her concentration. She had been teaching for years, and never before had a student been so bold, so brazen, as to pick her up. For a heartbeat, she considered slipping out, transforming back into human form, and re-entering the room to restore the proper balance of authority. But she didn't. Once the cat had freed herself, Dylan pulled his notes back out, the unfinished transfiguration, essential briefs, and pretended to study. McGonagall glanced down at him. Seeing him actually reading pulled her mood a little straighter. Her head tipped, she gave a small approving bob, her ears twitched, and her tail flicked once from side to side. Dylan caught it from the corner of his eye. She really is adorable, he murmured, then shut the thought away and focused on the pages. Another, more practical thought bubbled up. He needed to get the breeding permit for the Umber Shadow quickly. When he'd bought the owl, he'd gone to Diagon Alley and learned something about the process, but handling it himself would be a hassle. It would be much easier to have an adult wizard or a reputable magizoologist write a letter of explanation on his behalf. He already had someone in mind, Hagrid. As gamekeeper and a lover of magical creatures, and being half-giant, Hagrid knew about beasts in a way few did. If Dylan could get Hagrid to vouch for him, getting the permit would be much simpler. He also knew Harry was close to Hagrid. He'd have to make sure to get on Harry's good side for this. More students filed in. Harry and Ron were still absent. The bell rang, and the two of them finally arrived, late and breathless. The tabby's green eyes narrowed on the rostrum. With a quick, fluid motion, she leapt and in a blink folded into human form. The students around them went silent, mouths open. Dylan put on a suitably dazed look. He'd already had his fun. Professor McGonagall stood there, stern and composed. Late as a team. Marvelous. Perhaps I should turn one of you into a pocket watch so you'd know the time. Harry muttered. Sorry, Professor. We didn't mean, Ron added. We got lost. The castle's huge. McGonagall gave them a look that suggested maps and watches would have been the least of their problems. Then perhaps I should turn you into a map so you'll find your way. They were properly chastised and quickly took the nearest seats, directly next to Dylan. Time is precious, Professor McGonagall began, her voice all business now as she climbed onto the rostrum. Transfiguration will be the most complex and dangerous magic you study here. Do not take it lightly. Her eyes swept the room. If anyone causes trouble in my class, they will not be welcome in this classroom again. As she finished the sentence, she flicked her wand. The rostrum in front of her instantly transformed into a large pink pig. Everyone in the classroom let out a simultaneous gasp. Chapter 17. Professor McGonagall's Private Lesson. Under Professor McGonagall's stern gaze, the students barely breathed. Each behaved with careful obedience. Dylan slid the book he had been reading into his backpack and set a beginner's guide to transfiguration in front of him. His system rated his transfiguration skill at 3/10, the result of long, painstaking study. Unlike the levitation charm, which he'd practiced only briefly, his experiments in transfiguration had been cautious, and he had only reached level 3. McGonagall's warning suddenly made perfect sense. Transfiguration was one of the most dangerous subjects Hogwarts taught. Transfiguration separates into transforming inanimate objects and transforming living things. Changing a desk into a stool is one thing. At worst, you lose a material. But animate transfiguration is like surgery. A single mistake can cost a life. Transfiguring a person or animal requires exacting precision. Errors can have terrible, irreversible consequences. Take animagus transformations. They sound simple, turning into an animal, but if the transformation erodes self-awareness, how could one ever return to human form? If someone truly believed they were an animal, reversal might be impossible. And transfiguration isn't limited to those two categories. Its scope is vast. That breadth is why it is so difficult to master. The material McGonagall taught covered almost everything Dylan had wanted to know. Even with a skill rating of 3, he could follow and understand the essentials. For the other students, however, it was harder. They scribbled furiously, trying to capture every point McGonagall mentioned. When the class ended, Dylan felt he had learned a great deal. Others sighed with relief. Even with detailed descriptions in books, one student murmured, "Without a teacher to guide you, self-study will still lead to mistakes." Dylan agreed with McGonagall's teaching. He knew that even mastering simple inanimate transfiguration was no small feat. I can only transform less complex objects for short periods, he thought. I still need a lot of practice. Because Dylan already knew how to transfigure objects, and his results were more complex than McGonagall had required, she generously awarded him extra credit. Hermione also earned 5 house points for Gryffindor after successfully performing a transfiguration. Many others struggled. Some could only make objects twitch or vibrate. Harry and Ron fussed for a long time, but couldn't turn the match in front of them into metal. "This is really hard," Ron admitted finally. After class, Dylan packed his things and walked straight to Professor McGonagall, holding out his notebook. "Professor McGonagall, I have a few questions." McGonagall nodded. "Come with me to my office." They left the classroom together. McGonagall took Dylan's notebook and flipped through it. The tidy, dense handwriting made her expression sharpen into approval. "You often find contradictions when you read different books on the same spell," she said. Entering her office, Dylan asked, "When there are conflicting explanations, how do you know which one is correct?" McGonagall shook her head. "What you call contradictions are often signs that you haven't yet grasped the essence of the spell." She looked at him while speaking, deliberate and precise. "Every accomplished witch or wizard develops their own understanding of the same spell. Different approaches don't necessarily mean one is wrong. They will only affect how quickly you can cast it, how much magic you use, and the exact power and effect of the spell while you are casting it. As you actually use magic, you'll form your own interpretation." Dylan blinked. Magic, he realized, was a bit like mathematics. The underlying principles remain the same, but people may use different methods to arrive at the same result. McGonagall continued, flipping through his notes. "Many of these entries are your own reflections from reading. I imagine some of them are unconventional." Dylan braced himself. Who said they were wrong? Her eyes swept up from the page to meet his. "Your ideas are unconventional, yes, but many are insightful. That is remarkable." Dylan felt a flush of surprise. She wasn't dismissing his work. She praised it. "I'll keep your notebook for now," McGonagall said. "You must have your class notes written in your textbook?" Dylan nodded. "Leave the textbook with me. I'll annotate your ideas in it, and you can ask for it next class." Dylan stared. He hadn't expected McGonagall to personally annotate his notes. "Are you sure? Won't that be inconvenient?" "It's no trouble," she said. "Perhaps because you are only at the start of your formal studies, some of your lines of thought intrigued me. This initial period of learning often produces fanciful or even immature ideas, but that doesn't mean they're without value. Once you've fully learned the textbook material, revisiting these notes may give you fresh insight." She took the textbook Dylan handed over. "I've seen many promising students, and with a little guidance, your natural curiosity could make you very powerful, not in a boastful way, but in the proper pursuit of skill. You might even surpass those who taught you." Dylan bowed his thanks. "Thank you for your guidance, Professor McGonagall." "Any other questions?" she asked. Dylan hesitated a moment, then asked, "Yes, about the structure of matter." Chapter 18. The Little Wizard's Self-Esteem is Terrible. Dylan sat in Professor McGonagall's office, firing off question after question about every knot of magic that had puzzled him since he began studying transfiguration. Even for things outside her specialization, she answered patiently, offering insights and demonstrations. A small notification blinked in Dylan's peripheral vision. Your transfiguration proficiency has increased. Current progress, 35%. He glanced at the panel. His proficiency had risen by 0.5 points, now sitting at 3.5 tenths, 35% toward the next level, edging closer to level 4. He'd learned a lot about transforming inanimate objects. Without touching living creatures or attempting animagus forms, he could already transfigure non-living things with convincing realism. Of course, that required understanding what he wanted to change. To alter something completely, he had to grasp its principles and internal structure. Saying you wanted an object to be different wasn't enough. Without true comprehension of its makeup, you could only create the external shape of it. If he turned an apple into an alarm clock without knowing how an alarm clock worked, he might make something that looked like an alarm clock on the outside but was still apple mush inside. When Dylan left, Professor McGonagall rubbed her stomach and smiled to herself. This little wizard asks so many questions. She rose and headed out to eat, that smile never leaving her lips. But I've led another student into the Hall of Transfiguration, she murmured, pleased. After leaving McGonagall's office, Dylan headed straight for the Great Hall. The lunchtime bustle hummed around him. There was more than an hour before afternoon classes, plenty of time. As he entered, he saw Harry and Ron waving, Neville hovering shyly by them. "Oh my goodness, Dylan, you're amazing. You added a whole 10 points to Gryffindor in Transfiguration," Ron crowed. He shot a look at Hermione, who was eating nearby. Not like some people, who boast and only manage 5 points. Hermione shot Ron a glare, then glanced at Dylan and returned to her meal with a "humph." Dylan shrugged. "Whether it's 5 or 10 points, they're points for our house. That's better than losing points, isn't it?" Ron's face froze at that. Hermione almost burst out laughing. She stole another glance at Dylan as he took his seat. Harry, sensing the tension, jumped in. "Dylan, did you go to Professor McGonagall after class to ask questions?" Dylan nodded. "I had some doubts about Transfiguration. I wanted to make sure my reasoning was right." "Dylan, you learned so fast," Harry said. Ron, unable to help himself, muttered, "And your remarks are awfully sharp." Dylan gave a helpless smile. "I'm just stating facts. Points are points. They help the house." "We're a collective," Ron protested. "You don't need to compare. Points aren't everything. Self-awareness and happiness are what matter most." Ron looked half convinced. "How can points not matter? They mean the house cup at the end of the term." Dylan didn't press the issue. He wasn't his father, he thought wryly, nor was he someone obligated to spin parables for children. Ron was young and competitive. He'd learn in time. There was no need for Dylan to lecture. Ron pouted. "It's a shame I can't even transfigure a match properly. Neville and Siamis can both turn matches into iron rods." He jabbed his fork at the vegetables. "And that professor was so fierce." Dylan realized Ron still steamed about being scolded by Professor McGonagall that morning. From Dylan's perspective, an adult who'd lived 2 lives, it was not a big deal. But for a proud, competitive boy, public reprimands stung. Ron continued, "We weren't even late on purpose. That blasted staircase sent us to the 4th floor. Filch went nuts, chasing us down nonstop. You have no idea how hard Harry and I tried to get into class on time." Dylan chewed his beef, then spoke slowly. "Ron, I know getting scolded feels awful, but Professor McGonagall was doing it for your sake, for you and Harry." "But she was so harsh. She just wanted to assert authority, to look strict," Ron protested. "She probably does it to students from other houses, too." Dylan shook his head quietly. Children's pride was a force to reckon with. "Besides," Ron jabbed on, lowering his voice, "that horrible Malfoy came over after class and mocked us." Dylan blinked. So that was the real grievance. He'd gone straight to McGonagall after class and hadn't known. He decided to change the subject to something that would put Ron's fears into perspective. "Do you know what an acromantula is?" he asked. Harry, Ron, Neville, Seamus, and Hermione all looked up. "What's that?" Harry asked. Dylan's tone grew grave. "A huge, carnivorous magical spider. Acromantulas are known to eat people. It's in their nature." "Terrifying," Neville exclaimed. "But that's not the worst part," Dylan continued. "The really terrifying thing is what happens if a wizard becomes one and forgets they're human. If you lose your sense of self and accept the spider form, you'll stop wanting to change back." Eventually, you'll become a monster that only knows how to hunt and eat people." At Dylan's words, the group's faces went pale. "Of course," he added, "that's an extreme example." Ron relaxed a little, letting out a shaky breath, relief that his own embarrassment wasn't the end of the world. But Dylan pressed on, drawing the image further to make his point. "And it's not just acromantulas. You could be trapped as a slimy basilisk, an ugly grindilo, or even a stinking bowtruckle if you forgot who you really are and refused to transform back." A hush fell over the table, the vivid, grotesque possibilities settling in like a cold draft. Hiss! Chapter 19 became the little wizard's spiritual mentor. Harry, Ron, and the others stared, faces drained of color. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Finally, someone managed, "What are those things?" Dylan was quiet for a beat, then answered plainly, "They're aggressive magical creatures used for transfiguration practice, and they don't look pleasant." Ron made a small protesting sound. Dylan met his gaze and spoke carefully, enunciating every word. "Do you still think learning transfiguration is a trivial thing?" He continued without waiting for an answer. "Professor McGonagall scolded you so harshly because she doesn't want anyone to be careless. Transfiguration can be deadly. It's not just that you might end up turned into another animal to survive. If something goes wrong while you're casting live transfiguration, you might not even survive until you complete the change. You could end up a puddle of flesh." "Oh my God," someone whispered. Dylan's words made the room queasy. Looking at the slabs of meat and the practice specimens arranged on the benches, many of the younger students went pale and pressed hands to their mouths. Ron swallowed, hesitated, then mumbled, "I know I was wrong." Dylan smiled. "That's enough, so long as you understand transfiguration isn't simple and that it's dangerous." Harry took a sip of water. "Dylan, I practiced the whole lesson, and I still couldn't turn a matchstick into even a small iron rod. I couldn't make it metal. How did you turn yours into a needle?" Ron nodded and added, "And you even turned it into a brooch." They weren't asking Dylan instead of Hermione because Hermione hadn't done it. She had. It was because Dylan seemed approachable. He never boasted about success. He accepted praise quietly. Hermione, on the other hand, had a tendency to get smug when she did well, and the others instinctively avoided that. So they asked Dylan. "How did I do it?" he repeated, clicking his tongue. "You raise the wand, say the incantation, gather the magic, and cast. That's all. But," he paused, then asked, "why don't you tell me how you think about transfiguration? How do you try to use it?" Harry answered first. "I said the spell Professor taught and tried to imagine the matchstick as a needle." Ron chimed in, "Same here." Dylan scratched his head. "It's not surprising you thought that at first. I did too." That admission made Ron feel briefly a kinship with a genius. Then Dylan's next words cut the warmth away. "But after a couple of tries, I realized that doesn't work." Ron went quiet. Dylan smiled and began to explain the crucial points of transfiguration, how intent, visualization, and the precise control of magical energy mattered far more than rote chanting. He broke the process down patiently, step by step. Lunchtime came and went in a blur. After eating, the group headed to charms. The first spell was the levitation charm. Dylan was already at a high proficiency. Flitwick praised him openly when Dylan's work went far beyond that of the other first years. After the lecture, Flitwick opened the floor to questions. Dylan asked very difficult, insightful questions that demonstrated a deeper understanding than most students. Even Hermione couldn't match his line of inquiry. Professor Flitwick answered Dylan's questions for nearly half an hour before finally interrupting. He arranged to speak with Dylan at a separate time so the rest of the class wouldn't be monopolized. The day slipped by quickly. The next day in herbology, Dylan's pace matched the other students. Neville, sitting nearby, threw himself into the class with contagious enthusiasm. His notes were painstaking and detailed, and Dylan caught himself admiring Neville's earnestness. In the afternoon's history of magic, Dylan was more interested than Ron or Harry, but Professor Binns's teaching left much to be desired. Binns droned on, reading from his notes without passion or new insight. Dylan found himself relying on the textbook and his own notes to actually learn the material. Over the next few days, Dylan spent most of his free time in professors' offices asking questions and exploring ideas. Word spread. A first year who was studious, diligent, and extremely bright had appeared. Dylan only thought his magical talent showed a slight natural affinity so far. If he ever took to studying the dark arts, he suspected his progress would be astonishingly fast. Time flew. Friday came, and Dylan joined Harry and the others in the Great Hall. Ron looked surprised. "Dylan, you didn't get up early this morning?" Dylan piled pasta onto his plate. "I didn't have to. Luna went to deliver a letter for me. Besides, I've already reviewed the usual points, so I'm taking it easy today." Harry and Ron exchanged a look. Taking it easy seemed different by Dylan's standards. He twirled a forkful of pasta and ate. The noodles were al dente and the tomato meat sauce sweet and tangy, a taste he was used to from growing up with British food. "So what classes do we have today?" Ron asked, turning to Harry. "Why don't you ask Dylan?" Harry deflected. Dylan thought a moment. "We should have potions for the whole day, and it looks like it'll be with Slytherin." Chapter 20, Professor Snape's Venomous Tongue. "Ah!" When Ron heard they'd be having potions with Slytherin, his face immediately lit up. He winked at the others. "I heard Slytherin's head of house is even stricter than Professor McGonagall," Neville murmured. "That's mostly for students from other houses. He can be surprisingly lenient with his own." Dylan raised an eyebrow. There was truth in that. When class began, Professor Snape started calling the roll. After he called Harry's name, his voice paused. "Oh, let's see, the famous Harry Potter." Snape's gaze was cool and flat, almost hostile when it met Harry's. Then he announced, "Dylan Hawkwood." "Professor, I'm here!" Dylan's voice rang out, theatrical and confident. Snape's eyes snapped to him, and Dylan met them without flinching. It was like a starving dog finally seeing a meat bun. Something almost hungry flickered across Snape's face. He tightened his brow and moved on, placing the attendance sheet on the lectern and sweeping the room with that acid stare. "Good day, you foolish little wizards." Snape's voice was low and sharp, laced with contempt, but impossible to ignore. "Potions is not magic. It is an exacting and rigorous art. You will not need your idiotic wand-waving here. I do not expect all of you to appreciate the subtle beauty hidden in the fragrant white steam that curls from a slow-simmering cauldron." He looked at Malfoy. "I only hope a few outstanding students might understand the heady, mind-bending power of the liquid that can be poured into another's veins. I can teach you to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death." His tone altered slightly, but the premise is a few outstanding students. Some foolish idiots will never understand the mysteries of potions. None of the students present, most of whom were experiencing Slytherin's potions class for the first time, had ever heard anyone claim that potion making could stop death. Their eyes widened. Dylan's interest sharpened. Potions were deep, exacting, and beautiful, worth a lifetime of study. Snape's words were not idle boasting. The elixir of life could in fact be brewed by potioneers. While waiting for classes, Dylan had devoured ancient texts on potion making. His previous life had left him with some knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine, and he'd compared it with potions ever since he began learning Hogwarts as subject. Both involved combining herbs, balancing properties, amplifying some effects, suppressing others. As he studied more, he noticed differences too. The herbs used in Muggle medicine lacked the mystical properties the ingredients in potions could possess. And yet, chemistry, Dylan thought, was closer to potions than Chinese medicine. Before chemistry had been understood, who could have predicted the explosive reactions? Ingredients like unicorn horn dust, mandrake root, and salamander eyes behaved like reagents. Acids and bases, oxidation-reduction reactions. There were clear parallels. Potion making demanded the same strictness, precise slicing, measured drops, fixed ratios, deliberate timing. Stirring counts could be the equivalent of syllables in an incantation. The finished potion was, in a way, a spell captured in liquid. The mystical properties of ingredients were coaxed out by heat, time, and motion. Dylan was eager to explore all of it. As for Professor Snape, he was just another teacher to be outlearned. "Little celebrity," Snape said, narrowing his eyes at Harry. "Your arrival has caused a sensation at Hogwarts. Answer me. What would be the consequence of adding powdered asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Dylan knew the answer. But he was sitting in the back with Ron. Harry had refused a front row seat and couldn't leap up instantly. He froze, indecisive. Snape fired off 2 more questions in quick succession. Harry couldn't answer a single one. The look on Snape's face grew colder. Gryffindor, 10 points from you. Dylan wasn't bothered by the loss himself. Instead, he swallowed each of Snape's criticisms as lessons. The man might have a venomous tongue, but his knowledge was undeniable. Dylan meant to learn everything the austere professor knew. By the time Snape had passed Harry in the back row, Gryffindor had already lost 5 points. He moved on toward Dylan, planning a withering remark, but noticed that Dylan's every action at the cauldron matched the exact cautions Snape had just listed. Snape paused, a flash of surprise crossing his features. Still, he did not return the points he'd taken. He began to walk on. "Professor Snape, please don't leave yet. I have a few key points I'd like to ask about." Dylan called, stopping him. Snape's stride faltered. His cloak, which had been billowing, came to a sudden halt. He turned, fixing Dylan with that stony stare. "Talking with a divided mind while brewing, Gryffindor. 10 points from you." "All right," Dylan smiled. "What I want to ask is, if I drop in?" He rattled off several technical questions. Snape answered each with clipped precision. The more he replied, the more he realized this Hawkwood was not like the other fools in his class. There was a careful mind at work and a natural feel for the craft. Snape's impression of Dylan shifted minutely. "And what else would my achievement reward be?" Dylan asked next, his tone casual but clearly seeking more.